Dark clouds covered the sky of the abandoned planet. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of ancient dust. Vines crawled over the ruins of a forgotten palace, their roots twisting through cracks in the stone. It had been centuries since anyone had walked these halls, until now. A group of alien archaeologists moved carefully through the ruins, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Their leader, a tall, gray-skinned being with 4 eyes, raised a scanner. A low hum filled the air as the device flickered with strange symbols. "The readings are strong here," he said, his voice deep and distorted through his helmet. They stopped in front of a massive stone door. Strange carvings covered its surface, worn down by time but still holding secrets. One of the younger archaeologists, a reptilian creature with scaled fingers, traced the symbols with a claw. "This language, it is old, very old," she whispered. The leader stepped closer. "Can you read it?" The reptilian hesitated, then nodded slowly. "It speaks of a ruler, a human." Silence fell over the group. Humans were nothing but myths now, stories told to frighten younglings. They had vanished from the galaxy long ago, destroyed in wars that no one even remembered. And yet here, on this lost world, was proof that they had once ruled. The leader motioned for his team to move. "Open the door." They placed a device against the stone, and with a deep rumble, the door slowly slid open. Dust and darkness spilled out, swallowing the light of their lanterns. A long chamber stretched before them, its walls covered in faded murals. They showed scenes of war, of towering machines, of battles fought in the stars. And at the end of the chamber, sitting alone on a raised platform, was a throne. It was massive, carved from black stone, its surface engraved with markings of power. The archaeologists approached carefully, their eyes scanning every detail. But what caught their attention was not the throne itself. It was the figure sitting on it. A man. His body was wrapped in ancient armor, golden and cracked with age. A thick layer of dust covered him, as if he had been sitting there for centuries. His hands rested on the armrests, his head slightly tilted downward, eyes closed. One of the archaeologists let out a nervous laugh. "A statue," he said, stepping closer. "A very well-made one." The leader wasn't so sure. He reached out with his scanner. The screen flickered wildly. His 4 eyes widened. "No, this is no statue." The room went silent. The air felt heavy, charged with something unseen. The reptilian archaeologist swallowed hard. "But that is impossible. No human could survive this long." The leader took a slow step back. His instincts screamed at him. This was not right. Something ancient, something powerful, was in this room with them. Then the dust stirred. The sound was soft, like a whisper in the dark. The archaeologists froze. A faint hiss filled the chamber as something behind the throne released pressure. Metal creaked. A low, steady beeping began to echo. The man's fingers twitched. A gasp came from the group as the figure on the throne shifted slightly. A slow, deep breath rattled through the chamber. Then his eyelids flickered, and he opened his eyes. A golden glow burned in them, unnatural and piercing. He lifted his head, looking at the beings before him. For a long moment, no one moved. The leader took a cautious step forward. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" The man studied him, as if searching for something familiar. His face was sharp, his features regal yet worn by time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, filled with an ancient weight. "You should not have awakened me." A cold chill ran through the group. The leader opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the room trembled. A deep vibration rolled through the palace walls. The murals flickered as old mechanisms came to life. The man slowly rose from the throne. Dust poured from his armor as he straightened, his presence towering over them. He took a single step forward, and the floor beneath him cracked. The air around him pulsed with unseen energy. "Where am I?" he asked, his golden eyes burning into the leader's. The archaeologists took a step back, fear creeping into their movements. The leader forced himself to stay calm. "You are on Taurus 9, an abandoned world." The man frowned. His gaze shifted to the murals, then back to them. "Abandoned?" His voice was sharper now, questioning. "And the Empire?" No one answered. A long silence stretched between them before the leader finally found his voice. "The human empire is gone." The man stared at him, unblinking. Then, slowly, his hands clenched into fists. Impossible. The walls shuddered again, and this time, the sound of something deep within the ruins stirred. A mechanical groan, like gears grinding after centuries of sleep. The archaeologists glanced at each other nervously. The man took another step forward, his movements growing stronger with each breath. His golden eyes darkened. "If the Empire has fallen," he said, voice like thunder, "then I will bring it back." The palace trembled, the air crackled with energy, and the forgotten throne had awakened. The walls of the alien lab pulsed with a dim blue light. Machines hummed in the background, scanning, analyzing, recording. Cold metal restraints wrapped around the man's wrists and ankles, locking him in place. He sat upright on a medical table, his golden eyes staring straight ahead, unmoving, silent. The alien scientists stood in a half-circle around him, their scaled and gray-skinned faces tense with uncertainty. They whispered among themselves, but no one dared to step closer. Finally, the leader of the expedition, the four-eyed alien named Karzak, took a slow step forward. "He hasn't spoken since we brought him here," he said, glancing at the monitors. "His vitals are stable. Too stable. No signs of aging, no signs of decay." The reptilian scientist beside him flicked her tail nervously. It is as if time never touched him. Karzak studied the human's face. Despite the dust and age, there was something powerful about his features. His skin was unblemished, his expression calm, almost as if he were waiting, watching. Karzak took a deep breath and spoke in a careful, measured tone. "Can you understand me?" For a moment, nothing happened. The hum of the machines filled the silence. Then, without warning, the man's eyes moved. Slowly, he turned his head, locking his golden gaze onto Karzak. The leader felt his throat tighten. Those eyes, there was something ancient in them, something dangerous. The human blinked once, then he spoke. "Where am I?" His voice was deep, steady, but laced with something else, something distant. Karzak hesitated. "You are on our research vessel. We found you on Taurus 9 in a ruined palace." The human exhaled slowly, his eyes unfocused. For a brief moment, Karzak saw something flicker across his face. Pain, confusion. Then his gaze sharpened. "How long?" Karzak's fingers twitched. He knew what the man was asking. He chose his words carefully. "We're unsure, but records of the human empire, they vanished from history over 15,000 cycles ago." Silence. The human did not react, but Karzak saw his fists clench slightly against the restraints. His breathing remained steady, but the air in the room suddenly felt heavier. Then the man closed his eyes, and the memories came. Flashes of war. Flashes of fire. Earth's skies burning red as enemy fleets descended. The endless battles across the galaxy. His empire, his people, fighting against impossible odds. His throne room filled with traitors, their faces cold, their words like knives. "You must leave," they had told him. "For the empire to survive, you must disappear." He remembered the pain in his chest as they sealed him away, the hiss of the cryo chamber. The last thing he saw before darkness took him, a woman's face, filled with regret. Then nothing. Nothing until now. His eyes snapped open. The golden glow flickered for a moment before settling. Karzak took a cautious step back. "What do you remember?" The human's expression was unreadable. Then he spoke. "I remember everything." The air in the room grew tense. The other scientists exchanged nervous glances. Karzak swallowed. "What was your name?" he asked. The human looked at him for a long moment. Then, in a voice like a storm rolling over the horizon, he said, "I was the last emperor of humanity." A shiver ran through the room. The words carried weight, authority, as if spoken by a ruler addressing his court. The scientists instinctively straightened. Even Karzak, a veteran of many discoveries, felt his hands shake. The human slowly tested the restraints, metal creaking under the pressure. Karzak stepped forward quickly. "Wait," he said, raising a hand. "We mean you no harm." The Emperor's golden eyes flicked to him. "Then release me." Karzak hesitated. Before he could respond, the ship's lights flickered. A low alarm began to echo through the corridors. One of the scientists turned sharply toward the control panel. "Something is happening outside." Karzak's communicator crackled. A frantic voice came through. "Sir, we have an unknown vessel approaching. No, multiple vessels. They appeared out of nowhere." Karzak stiffened. "Identify them." "We can't. They're using a signal we've never seen before." "But wait." The voice faltered. "They're hailing us." A cold feeling crept up Karzak's spine. "Patch it through." The speakers in the room crackled, and then a deep mechanical voice filled the air. "Release the human." Every scientist turned to stare at the Emperor. The Emperor, however, only smiled. It was small, but there was something dangerous in it. Karzak turned back to the communicator. "And if we don't?" The voice on the other end didn't hesitate. "Then you die." A heavy silence followed. The Emperor tilted his head slightly, looking amused. Then he spoke softly, almost to himself. "They were waiting for me." The ship shook as something outside opened fire. The Emperor flexed his hands, and this time, the metal restraints groaned under his strength. Karsak made a choice. "Unlock him," he ordered. The scientists hesitated. "I said unlock him." With a sharp hiss, the restraints snapped open. The Emperor slowly stood, rolling his shoulders. His golden eyes gleamed as he turned toward the door. "Good," he murmured. "Now let's see who came for me." The ship trembled again as another blast shook its hull. Sirens blared. The Emperor took a step forward, and the air around him crackled. Somewhere in the darkness of space, the past had finally caught up to him. The ship trembled under the weight of enemy fire. Sirens wailed through the corridors as emergency lights flickered, casting long shadows against the walls. Karsak barely kept his footing as another blast rocked the vessel. "They're targeting our engines." A voice crackled through the communicator. "Shields are failing." Karsak turned to the human Emperor. The golden-eyed man stood perfectly still, unaffected by the chaos around him. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something cold, calculating. "You recognize them," Karsak said. It wasn't a question. The Emperor exhaled slowly. "I know the kind of men they are." Outside, in the vast darkness of space, the unknown ships loomed closer. Black, angular, built for war. They moved in silence, their weapons glowing with an eerie blue light. These were not pirates, not scavengers. They were disciplined, organized. A single message blinked on the ship's monitor. "Release the human." Karsak clenched his fists. "They're not giving us much of a choice." The Emperor finally moved, stepping toward the viewing window. His golden eyes scanned the approaching fleet, his expression unreadable. Then softly he said, "I need a weapon." Karsak hesitated. "If I give you one, will you fight them?" The Emperor turned his gaze to him. "If you don't, you'll die." Karsak cursed under his breath. He motioned to one of his soldiers, who hesitated before handing the human a plasma rifle. The Emperor took it, weighing it in his hands, his fingers brushing over the unfamiliar technology. "It's not what I'm used to," he murmured. Then he looked at Karsak. "Where's your armory?" Karsak blinked. "Why?" The Emperor's grip tightened around the rifle. "Because if they came for me, then they fear me. And if they fear me," his golden eyes burned, "then I should remind them why." Another explosion shook the ship. This time, it was followed by a deep, metallic groan. The hull was starting to buckle. The enemy was boarding. Karsak motioned to his guards. "Get him to the armory." The Emperor didn't wait for permission. He moved quickly, his steps eerily silent for a man of his size. The soldiers followed him, weapons raised, but Karsak could see it in their eyes. They weren't sure if they were guarding him or following him into battle. As they turned a corner, the emergency doors hissed open. The armory was small, filled with weapons scavenged from 100 different worlds. The Emperor walked past the racks of plasma rifles and energy blades, his gaze cold and uninterested. Then he stopped. In the far corner of the room, locked inside a containment field, was an old war relic, a massive two-handed sword, its black surface etched with glowing red veins. The scientists had never figured out where it came from. It was human in design, but no human had wielded such weapons in over 15,000 cycles. The Emperor stepped forward, his hands stretched out. The containment field sparked, then shattered. The scientists gasped. The Emperor took the sword in one hand, testing its weight. A small, almost imperceptible smile crossed his lips. "I remember this," he whispered. Before anyone could react, the alarms blared louder. The ship's automated defenses had failed. The enemy was inside. Heavy boots pounded against the metal floors. Shadows moved through the corridors. The first wave of soldiers appeared at the far end of the hallway, tall, armored, their helmets featureless and black. They raised their weapons. The Emperor stepped forward, and then he moved. One moment, he was standing still. The next, he was a blur. The first soldier barely had time to register what was happening before the Emperor's sword cleaved through his armor like paper. Sparks flew as the massive blade carved through flesh and metal, sending the soldier crashing to the ground. The others hesitated, just for a second. It was a second too long. The Emperor spun, the red-veined blade humming with power. A second enemy fell, then a third. His movements were precise, brutal, a dance of destruction that left only silence in its wake. The remaining soldiers staggered back. They had expected an artifact, a relic of a dead empire. What they found was something else. Something alive. The last of them turned to flee, but the Emperor raised a single hand. The air around him cracked with unseen energy. The soldier froze, his limbs locking as if held by an invisible force. The Emperor stepped closer, his golden eyes glowing like burning suns. "Who sent you?" he asked, his voice calm. The soldier struggled, his helmeted face trembling. "Don't you, we were ordered," his voice cut off in a choked gasp. The Emperor's fingers tightened. The air around the soldier compressed. His armor groaned under the pressure. "Who sent you?" The soldier's breathing was ragged. Then finally, he whispered, "The council." The Emperor's expression didn't change, but Kazakh saw something shift in his eyes. "Impossible," the Emperor murmured. "The council died with my empire." The soldier coughed, barely able to speak. "Not all of them." The Emperor stared at him for a long moment. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he released his grip. The soldier crumpled to the floor, gasping for air. The Emperor turned away, his golden eyes burned with something new, something dark. "They were waiting for me," he said softly. Kazakh stepped forward cautiously. "What does this mean?" The Emperor turned, gripping his sword. "It means my war is not over." Outside, the enemy ships were regrouping. More would come. The Emperor tightened his grip on his blade. "Let them." The ship trembled under the weight of the damage it had taken. Sparks flickered from broken panels and warning sirens echoed through the corridors. The bodies of fallen enemies lay scattered across the metal floor, their armor still smoking from the Emperor's blade. Kazakh wiped green blood from his face and turned to the human standing in the middle of the chaos. The Emperor barely looked winded. His golden eyes glowed in the dim light, his sword resting at his side, its red veins pulsing as if alive. Outside, the enemy fleet was regrouping. Dark warships hovered in the void, their weapons charging for another attack. "They're not leaving," Kazakh muttered. The Emperor didn't respond. He stared at the ships through the shattered viewport, his face unreadable. Then he exhaled slowly. "They weren't sent to kill me," he said at last. "They were sent to test me." Kazakh frowned. "Test you?" The Emperor turned, gripping his sword tighter. "They wanted to see if I was still a threat." His gaze drifted to the bodies on the floor. "I think they have their answer." A sudden noise interrupted them, a deep, mechanical hum, low and rumbling. The main communications panel on the bridge crackled to life. A holographic projection flickered in the air, forming the image of a figure draped in shadow. Their face was hidden beneath a featureless metallic mask, but their voice was smooth, controlled. "So," the figure said, "it's true. The last emperor of humanity still walks." The Emperor didn't move. "Who are you?" The figure tilted their head slightly. "A ghost of your past. One of many." Kazakh narrowed his eyes. "You're with the council." The masked figure chuckled. "The council is long gone, but their will remains." They leaned forward slightly. "And you, Emperor, you are an anomaly, a relic of an age that should have died." The Emperor's expression remained calm, but Kazakh saw the way his fingers tightened around his weapon. "If you feared me," the Emperor said, "you should have destroyed me while I slept." The masked figure exhaled, amused. "Perhaps. But why kill the last emperor when he can be controlled?" The ship's warning lights flared red. Kazakh's heart pounded as he read the new alert. A foreign signal was spreading through their systems, fast, invasive. "They're trying to take control of the ship," one of the crew members shouted. The Emperor's gaze darkened. "They don't need to win the battle if they control the battlefield." The masked figure tilted their head again. "Surrender, Emperor. Step aboard our vessel, and you will be treated with respect." The Emperor smiled. It was small, but there was something dangerous in it. "I remember the last time someone told me that." He raised his hand. The air around the communications panel trembled, then shattered. The holographic figure flickered, then vanished as the transmission was violently cut off. The Emperor turned to Kazakh. "Get your best pilots. We need a ship." Kazakh hesitated. "Where are we going?" The Emperor sheathed his sword. "To take back what was mine." Outside, the enemy ships loomed closer. The war was about to begin. The enemy ships hum in the void, black and motionless, like vultures circling a dying beast. The alien research vessel, battered and barely holding together, was moments away from being overwhelmed. Kazakh could feel it in the way the ship trembled. Their defenses were failing. On the bridge, the tension was thick. Crew members scrambled to contain the cyber attack infecting their systems. Every monitor flashed red with warnings. "We've lost control of the main thrusters," a technician shouted. "Weapons are offline." Kazakh clenched his jaw. "They're not even firing anymore. They're just waiting for us to fall." Beside him, the Emperor stood still, golden eyes locked on the enemy fleet. He was calm. Too calm. Finally, he spoke. They want me to surrender. Kazak turned to him. Are you considering it? The Emperor smiled, cold and sharp. No, I just need to make them think I am. Before Kazak could ask what that meant, the Emperor stepped forward and pressed a control on the main console. The ship's failing communication system flickered back to life. A direct transmission to the enemy fleet. The masked figure appeared again, their image crackling with static. A wise choice, Emperor. Lay down your weapon and step aboard our flagship. No harm will come to you. The Emperor tilted his head slightly. Am I allies? The masked figure's pause was brief, but enough. They are. Unnecessary. The Emperor exhaled slowly. I thought as much. Then, in a single swift motion, he reached into the console and tore out a handful of exposed wires. Sparks flew. The transmission cut out. Kazak's eyes widened. What are you doing? We're completely defenseless. The Emperor turned to him, eyes burning with something fierce. Not yet. You said we have no weapons. Kazak hesitated, then nodded. Then we use theirs. Before Kazak could ask what that meant, the ship trembled. This time, not from an attack, but from movement. One of the enemy ships, a smaller escort frigate, suddenly lurched forward, spinning out of control. Its engines flared wildly before it veered directly into another vessel. The two ships collided with a thunderous explosion. The bridge fell silent. Kazak turned sharply to the Emperor. That wasn't an accident. The Emperor flexed his fingers. The air around him shimmered faintly, like heat off a desert floor. No, it wasn't. The crew stared at him, unsure whether to feel awe or fear. Kazak swallowed hard. You can control their ships? The Emperor picked up his sword, his expression unreadable. I was the ruler of humanity. Do you really think my empire fell without a fight? He turned back to the viewport, where the enemy fleet was already shifting formation, confused by the sudden loss of one of their own. He could feel their hesitation. Good. The masked figure's voice returned, this time not as a transmission, but as a booming announcement from their flagship. What have you done? The Emperor took a step forward, his presence radiating something vast and unknowable. I have returned, he said. Another enemy ship's engine stuttered, then roared to life. This time, it didn't crash. It turned, its weapons locking onto the flagship. For the first time, the enemy hesitated. The Emperor smiled. Let's see if they still remember how to kneel. The enemy ships hesitated. It was only for a second, but in war, a second was everything. The Emperor stood at the heart of the bridge, his golden eyes glowing in the dim light. His presence was no longer just a man standing among aliens. He was something else, something greater. Another enemy ship shuddered, its thrusters roaring to life against its will. The crew inside screamed in confusion as their own vessel turned against them. Its cannons rotated, targeting the nearest warship, and with a flash of plasma fire, it unleashed devastation upon its own fleet. The flagship's communication system crackled. The masked figure's voice was different now, shaken. This is impossible. The Emperor exhaled slowly. You spent so long trying to erase my kind from history, but you forgot one thing. Another ship turned. This one slammed its full weight into a nearby frigate, tearing through its hull like a blade through flesh. Explosions erupted in the void, debris scattering like shattered bones. The Emperor took another step forward. You may have destroyed my empire, he said, voice steady, but you did not destroy me. The remaining enemy ships panicked. Some tried to retreat, thrusters igniting in desperate attempts to escape the slaughter. Others opened fire on their own vessels, fearing what was happening in their ranks. The masked figure's fleet, so powerful moments ago, was now falling apart. Kazak could only stare. He had seen wars. He had seen battles where brute force decided the victor. But this was something else. This was domination. The masked figure's voice broke through the chaos. You think this will change anything? You're alone, Emperor. The galaxy has moved on without you. The Emperor tilted his head slightly. Then why are you so afraid? Silence. Then the enemy flagship's engines flared. It was running. Kazak's claws tightened around the edge of the console. They're retreating. The Emperor watched the ship's massive form vanish into the darkness. He could have stopped it. He could have reached out and crushed it as easily as he had the others. But he didn't, because there was something more important than vengeance. He turned to Kazak. Set a course for the nearest relay station. The galaxy needs to know what happened here. Kazak frowned. You want to send a message? The Emperor nodded. I want them to hear 3 words. The bridge was silent, waiting. Then the Emperor spoke. I have returned. Outside, the enemy fleet was in ruins. The battle was over. But the war was just beginning. The transmission echoed across the stars. 3 words, 3 simple words. I have returned. Galactic relay stations picked up the message, and within hours it spread like wildfire. Across 1,000 worlds, leaders, warlords, and rebels turned their eyes to the forgotten name of the last human emperor. Some whispered in fear, others in awe, but all of them knew history had just changed. Kazakh watched the signal's confirmation on the main console. It was done. There was no taking it back now. He turned to the Emperor. The galaxy will come for you now. The Emperor's golden eyes gleamed. Good. But even as he stood there, victorious in the aftermath of the battle, he felt it. Something old, something waiting. His return had set things in motion that even he could not yet see. Far away, on the other side of the galaxy, deep within the ruins of a forgotten world, a machine stirred. Ancient gears grown to life for the first time in centuries. A hidden system, long buried beneath the dust of time, activated. A cold, mechanical voice whispered into the darkness. Identity confirmed. The last Emperor has awakened, initiating Protocol 0. Back on the ship, Kazakh's sensors blared an alert. An incoming signal. No origin, no traceable source, just a message. The Emperor read it, his jaw tightening. You should not have returned. For the first time since his awakening, he hesitated. Kazakh's voice was quiet. What does it mean? The Emperor exhaled. It means this is bigger than I thought. He turned toward the viewport. The stars stretched before him, filled with old enemies, forgotten allies, and secrets long buried. The war was coming, and he would be ready.